Brian Rolapp stepped into the role of PGA Tour Commissioner-in-Waiting in 2025, arriving after more than 20 years working on media rights deals for the NFL. He is set to officially take over as commissioner from January 2027. When he joined, the PGA Tour was still absorbing the fallout from the LIV Golf split, dealing with nervous sponsors, inconsistent television ratings, and a group of players who had grown restless with the tour's competitive structure. His mandate was direct: fix the chaos and rebuild the tour's commercial value. On Tuesday, June 17, 2026, at TPC River Highlands, Rolapp addressed the media and outlined the PGA Tour's most significant competitive overhaul in decades. Beginning in 2028, players will compete across two separate tours, the Championship Series and the Challenger Series, with membership determined almost exclusively by performance. The top 90 players on the Championship Series will retain their membership for the following season, while Challenger Series players can earn promotion through multiple wins or strong season-long standings. On paper, the pitch was straightforward: concentrated star power, better television windows, and larger sponsor investment. The catch was built into the structure itself: limited entry into the top tier, with qualifiers and exemptions determining who gets into the rest. Historic tournaments including the Canadian Open, the Phoenix Open, and the Colonial now sit in a position where their long-term status is uncertain under the new model. Most players on tour stayed quiet about the announcement. That silence is part of what made Rory McIlroy's reaction stand out. McIlroy had already signaled discomfort with the direction of the tour before the two-tier system was formally unveiled. He had spoken about wanting more control over his own schedule, a sentiment that carried extra weight given his standing as the tour's most recognizable player. Through 2025, McIlroy played a reduced schedule, finishing that season with just 22 events, down from 26 in 2024. By mid-2026, he had made only 11 starts combined across the PGA Tour and DP World Tour, a number that reflected a deliberate shift rather than injury or decline. McIlroy explained the change in his own words at the 2025 Tour Championship: "I'll always choose the schedule that best fits me, and this year, 2025, that meant skipping a few signature events. I might skip less, in 2026. I might skip the same amount, I don't know." He also pointed to Tiger Woods as a precedent for prioritizing rest over volume, telling reporters, "That's what Tiger used to do." The tension moved from subtext to headline during McIlroy's press conference ahead of the U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills, held the week of June 15, 2026. Asked about the tour's proposed Track 1 and Track 2 system, McIlroy compared the Challenger Series events to glorified Korn Ferry Tour events. He specifically referenced the Canadian Open in his remarks, stating, "I guess, just recency, an event like last week, the Canadian Open, potentially going to one of these Track 2s. The comparison carried particular weight because the Korn Ferry Tour is where careers are built, not where a multiple major champion competes." McIlroy has won the Canadian Open twice in his career, making the reference to a tournament with that kind of history sliding into a lower competitive tier especially pointed. The comment spread quickly through golf media, in large part because it reflected a concern that had already been circulating quietly among players and fans rather than introducing a new grievance. Rolapp addressed McIlroy's comments directly during his Tuesday, June 17 press conference at TPC River Highlands, the same event where the Championship Series and Challenger Series were formally announced. He revealed that the two had spoken privately that morning, saying, "Yeah, I had a chance to speak with Rory today. We talked a bit about it, and I think he's made some comments publicly since then." Rolapp then laid out his defense of the new structure in detail, "But I think the best way to think about what we're doing here is that right now we have 47 events at the PGA Tour. We'll have 47 events going forward. That current model serves roughly 230 players. We'll serve that amount of players, the same." He continued by describing the reorganization as a matter of clarity rather than reduction: "We are just organized now in a more simple understanding competitively so our fans can understand it, our partners know what they're getting as far as value." On the specific comparison to the Korn Ferry Tour, Rolapp pushed back firmly: "If you look at the Challenger Series events, they'll be at venues you recognize. They'll be for healthy purses, which we announced today. They'll include a subset of the same 200 and change players that we have today. That is much different than what the Korn Ferry Tour is today. What had started as a structural policy dispute now had two named, quoted parties on opposite sides of a public disagreement, and golf media and fans split into camps over which side had the stronger argument. While the Challenger Series debate played out in press conferences, a separate and arguably more consequential situation was building around McIlroy's own playing schedule. PGA Tour rules require a fully exempt member to compete in a minimum of 15 events per season, or face a potential one-year suspension. There is precedent for this rule being enforced. Seve Ballesteros was suspended under it in 1986, and Martin Kaymer in 2016. By skipping the Travelers' Championship in June 2026, McIlroy's total for the season was set to land at 14 PGA Tour starts, one short of the requirement. McIlroy has been open about the reasoning behind his reduced schedule, having said in 2025, "I just played way too much last year. I want to be home more. I want to be a little more rested and fresh for bigger events." He has continued to play a full international schedule, including multiple DP World Tour events, while pulling back specifically from PGA Tour co-sanctioned events outside the majors and a handful of signature events. The PGA Tour's Player Handbook contains a provision under Article 9, Section H, which states, "The Commissioner, upon application by a foreign member and for medical reasons or other extraordinary circumstances that the Commissioner, at his discretion, determines to be a valid reason for not playing in at least 15 PGA Tour co-sponsored or approved tournaments, may reduce the 15 minimum, or 12 minimum as the case may be, tournament requirement." Multiple reports indicated that Rolapp planned to apply this discretionary clause to McIlroy, preserving his PGA Tour membership for 2027 despite the one-event shortfall. The only publicly cited grounds for such an exemption trace back to McIlroy's withdrawal from the Arnold Palmer Invitational earlier in the season due to a back injury, after which he returned to play the Players' Championship the following week. The reports of a likely exemption generated significant backlash. Analyst Trey Wingo addressed the situation directly on his program, stating, "Not everybody would get away with this, but it's Rory McIlroy." Critics have argued that a minimum event requirement loses its credibility if it is waived specifically for the tour's most prominent player, while others have noted that the discretionary clause has existed in the handbook for years and was designed to give the commissioner flexibility for genuinely exceptional circumstances. The situation places Rolapp in a difficult position regardless of which direction he chooses. Suspending McIlroy would mean sidelining the tour's most recognizable player at a moment when the PGA Tour is actively trying to rebuild sponsor confidence and television value. Declining to suspend him, using a clause that technically exists but has rarely been applied in a case with this level of visibility, invites direct comparisons to the Ballesteros and Kaymer suspensions and raises the question of whether the rule is enforced consistently. Rolapp has continued to defend the tour's broader restructuring publicly, framing the Championship Series and Challenger Series as an effort to simplify the competitive product for fans and partners. But the exemption decision runs alongside that messaging, and the two stories, the Challenger Series dispute and the 15-event rule exemption, have become intertwined in public discussion of whether the tour applies its own standards evenly. The exemption reporting has produced several distinct threads of reaction across the tour. Other players who have been required to meet the 15-event minimum in past seasons have grounds to question why the same standard would not apply to McIlroy. The PGA Tour's credibility on rule enforcement is directly affected, since a requirement that can be waived at the commissioner's discretion for a marquee player functions differently in practice than one applied uniformly. Fan trust in the fairness of tour governance is also a factor, particularly because the exemption story broke in the same stretch as the Challenger Series announcement, compounding the sense of a tour making decisions that favor its biggest names. Rolapp's authority as incoming commissioner is affected going forward as well, since any future disciplinary or discretionary decision will now be measured against how this specific case with McIlroy was handled. The broader implications extend past the relationship between one player and one executive. The Championship Series and Challenger Series restructuring, combined with the discretionary handling of the 15-event rule, raises questions about how the tour will balance the interests of its highest-profile players against the historic tournaments and non-star players who make up the rest of the competitive field. McIlroy himself later expressed support for the finalized changes once further details were released, but the sequence of events, the Korn Ferry Tour comparison, Rolapp's public rebuttal, and the separate exemption controversy, has already shaped how the two-tier system is being discussed heading into its 2028 launch.